Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the top 8 deck lists of the Pittsburgh Regional Championships. This was a 1,778 player regionals, which is absolutely absurd and is going to continue, I believe, throughout this season. Pokemon really is popping off at the moment in the competitive scene, and I'm all here for it. We had a really interesting breakdown of the top 8. The tournament was won by world champion Andrew Estrada, also making top 8 in London 2022, don't forget. So has been around the game for a while and played the Kyogre Lost Zone variant to once again show his prowess as a ruthless competitor, and piloted one of the hardest decks in the game to a regional win in this new season where you get the extra prizing, which gotta feel good. And we can straight away congratulate him on his Worlds invite. That is how things go in the new structure for the regional championships. You get that dub, suddenly you've booked your spot. So that's gotta feel good, and it means that Andrew doesn't have to worry about that rat race anymore, which is looking pretty good. However, yeah, played a bit of an interesting combination with this Kyogre. I think in his own little tweet about it, he said that there are some cards that may look a little out of place here and there, but they all served specific purposes for different times in the game and different matchups and whatnot. I'm looking at the likes of Horlucha being an interesting tech inclusion. I think this is certainly like a mirror-based tech card. Also the Roxanne being that backup supporter to Colress. We see that sometimes being a couple different supporter options, but having some hand disruption in the deck list makes sense. We also see 3 different types of stadium card in the deck. We have an Artisan, a Beach Court, and a Pokestop. I definitely like Pokestop as at least a one-of in Kyogre. It really helps you thin and get towards your overall Aqua combo. But as we've seen, Artisan's a great early game consistency card at different points in the game, and Beach Court has the upside of just giving you more pivots throughout, so all of these seem to serve decent purposes. And outside of that, this is one of those builds that isn't going crazy on recyclers and rods and whatnot, which makes the deck like a better 60 cards, but harder to pilot, right? Because it's a harder juggle of your resources. But rather than seeing like previously one Lost Vacuum, for example, in this build of Kyogre and trying to be a slower approach, this really is hybriding and still giving itself a decent chance of getting a 7 in the Lost Zone turn 2. So it's much more similar to a turbo-based build that we've seen in the past, but has an Aqua combo in here. Whereas there have been times where we've seen, as many as 3 or 4 Recycler in addition to Rods and Clara in the list. Those are too many clunky cards, whereas Andrew has kept it streamlined and on that same track as a turbo list, so it can fight that fight in other Lost Zone matchups and not really lose percentages by having the extra energy in the Kyogre package. It's still staying true to the usual turbo game plan. So I think this is a really nice fine line that the deck is treading, where it still has the power of turbo and isn't losing out on Lost Zone mirror matches, and still has that Aqua Storm combo to give it a better time into, the likes of Mew, the likes of Lugia, that sometimes the Turbo Lost Box struggles with. So yeah, seems like a really good combination of cards, and it's unsurprising that it was able to win the tournament. In at second, we have Jesse Parker. I'm going to tip my fedora to him because he has joined the 9-0 club at the regional championships, along with me, of course. So very cool to see. And it's playing a Miraidon build with Flaffy. And this is very similar to Sajan's Worlds list, where it's playing Beach Courts rather than playing Path to the Peak. That became all the rage over the last few weeks. However, this is just a solidly more aggressive approach. I really like seeing the Pokemon go Zapdos. That was a card that I was a big proponent of. It's playing the Flying Pikachu V as well. I think the mentality around this card is super interesting, just from a psychology perspective of seeing a VG player start to play the TCG compared to the TCG mindset of flipping a coin being such a bad feeling where you could just instantly lose the game. However, you should only really be attempting a fly when your back is already against the wall and you have no other perceivable win condition on the turn, And sometimes that 50-50 forces your opponent to have outs immediately in their hand. They need to have a boss's orders, essentially. So having the Iono/Judge plus fly play lets you have a 50-50 to get straight back into the game, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's unsurprising that a VGC player who plays towards these lower percentage plays of like paralysis and sleep and burn and all these other things with the secondary attack effects, that it's been incorporated into the TCG and it's seeing success and giving you percentages as you whittle down to the late game scenario in a number of matchups. So really cool to see. Also, we're seeing a Luminion in addition to Squawkabilly, which is something, a bit of a new adaptation, I think, from Jesse. I don't think it was played in the previous list. So yeah, cool to see. Overall, very powerful and a turbo-y list. And possibly by not playing Path of the Peak and instead having a Beach Court, you have higher likelihood of getting donks as well, or getting at least the immediate knockout from your generator high roll plays, rather than having paths which doesn't really help you in your mission of getting that turn 1 attack. Now you're more likely to get, for example, a Photon Blaster or that Lightning Rondo turn 1 because the Beach Court is adding to your overall switch outs. So this allows the deck to be even more aggressive than the path-based build in many regards. Colin was able to make top 4 with a Fusion Strike Mew-based build, playing some interesting stuff. I love to see the Town Store in here as a card that I was thinking of experimenting with myself, and it adds to the overall early search of Forest Sealstone, which doesn't feel too shabby, but also lets you cherry pick Box of Disaster and Choice Belt as and when you need them, and essentially you trim down 1 Choice Belt to play the Town Store, and you give yourself 1 extra Path Bounce, which isn't bad at all. It's also playing the Penny as a means of trying to protect yourself against Lost Zone Box, I have to presume, where you're trying to steal a turn away from them, which is nice. Outside of that, it's a very solid shell of Mew, and nothing too surprising to be seen here. But once again, proving its worth, proving that it's a consistent performer, and potentially that there's not enough text going around in deck lists to respect the Mew matchup. Andrew Hedrick won 3 regionals last season, 2 of them with Lugia actually, and is once again showing up in the top 4 of a regional championships, playing a single strike build of Lugia. And there's nothing too out of line with the deck list. I think just seeing 1 copy of Jet Energy is a little bit surprising, and really just leaning into the extra Diff Energy and the extra V-Guard Energy is a statement from Andrew to say that these are just the most powerful effects you can have right now for your colorless energy. Still playing the Radiant Serena as well, giving yourself some protection against Lost Zone, which is kind of floating in and out of the deck list right now. But overall, very streamlined, simple 60, and that's really what's tried and trusted with Lugia, because it's, at the end of the day, just trying to maximize your percentages of getting that turn 2 summoning star, and Andrew is pretty proficient with Lugia. I'm unsurprised to see him once again doing well with it. Michael was able to make a top 8 with Giratina, one of the most popular decks in the room on the day. We'll look at the overall day 1 and 2 breakdown in a moment. And yeah, it seems like it's once again a pretty solid list. It's going up to that 3rd copy of Path of the Peak and having that 3rd copy of Hand Disruption supporters. So it's giving himself a good chance of having some comeback potential. It's also got 1 copy of Lost Vacuum in the deck list, so you can try and unlock Path to at least give yourself some Greninja play throughout the game, but also is another means of ramping up your Lost Zone, so this can be a really big deal. And overall, another consistent list, and it seems to have got the job done for Michael here. Adam was another Miraidon gamer, making it into the top 8. This one also played the Pokemon Go Zapdos and also played the Drapion as well, so similar kind of mindset to Jesse by the looks of things, also trying to split up the path count with another stadium. This time it's Beach Court in here, so seems like the reduction of path was actually a good thing for Miraidon, where you're giving yourself those little bits of extra percentages. Also seeing a Lost Vacuum in here, so definitely expecting some mirror matches potentially, where you're able to vacuum away Bravery Charms from opponents, or just giving yourself extra search ability via Arven, so that you can bounce opposing paths and get into the game with your own tandem unit. Also, it makes Drapion a better play, of course, where you have Vacuum and Beach Court, so against new players you can bounce path and still have a 1-hit KO play. Yeah, once again, looking really good, and Miraidon seems to be here to stay. I mean, the waves of players started to pick up this archetype, and it seems like it's having good success now, and featuring a couple times in the top 8 is nothing to sniff at. Lucas is the first Chien-Pao backed caliber player to actually make top 8 at a higher tier event, and it's really impressive stuff and a really interesting deck list as well. We saw this a couple of times actually at the World Championships, where the Chen Pao Baxcalibur player was completely foregoing any V-Star whatsoever. There's been this tug of war of which is better, the Arc or the Palkia, and Lucas has said, how about neither? Let's just go for 2-2 big barrel and more early game consistency with the quad Pokestop in addition to Lost Vacuum to unlock your abilities, of course. We know how important Shivery Chill is. We know how important the concealed cards is in the opening stages just to get online. And I think this is going to be a deck list that a lot of people take from now on. You're also having the min-maxing of 170 hit point Frigibacks to give yourself a slightly better time into Lost Zone players, which I think is relevant as well. So your initial rare candy will always go into a 60 hit point Frigi, and then you can have that second one floating as less of a liability, which I think is really nice. And yeah, I've always been a key believer in Big Barrel being part of the Chen Pao deck, and it's unsurprising to me that the deck was able to go this far in the tournament because it has Iona proofing. It's a bit of a no-brainer from me all along, but it's great to see that a 2-2 line seems to be the best case of action here. Also seeing the double cancelling clone and, of course, the double super rod gives you a lot of means of reloading your Greninja and having extra turns of Moonlight Shuriken for maximum value as well, which I think is massive. So huge props to Lucas. I think this is a really streamlined, speedy build, and I think having that backup of the barrel to keep you in the game is a really great choice. Finally, we have the second Lugia in top 8, and it's Rahul, still hunting that regional win, but still really impressive results. And again, nothing too outlandish here, playing a Penny over any like Jet Energies and just sticking with the tried and trusted high counts of Gift and Guard, which sound good. Penny giving you some upside, certainly into Lost Zone matchups. I think against Kyogre it can be handy as well, where you're giving your opponent less multi-prize threats at times, or just even reducing your board altogether for less Aquastorm targets. So I think that was a crucial decision. You can check out his own tournament report on his channel, of course. But yeah, a straightforward Lugia, and getting the job done. It seemed to be a well-placed deck for the tournament because it seems to have one of the better times into Lost Zone Tina and Turbo, which were both very popular decks in the room. So finally, let's take a look at the deck usage for day 1 and 2 of the Pittsburgh Regional Championships. Like I said, almost 1,800 players, so a really wide pool. And I believe going into the next set of tournaments, it's not going to look too different to this. That is to say that there's going to be a number of decks around that sort of 8 to 13% range of play for the top like 6 to 7, maybe even the top 8 decks right now that you can think of. I think they're all going to have to be respected, and you're having to play 1/2 of them in Swiss in a lot of cases. Where it looks like the Lost Zone variants are going to be some of the most popular decks. If you bunch those together, that could be at least, 20% of the room, possibly a little bit more than that. Maybe even a quarter of the room is going to be some sort of Comfey deck. So I think that would be the thing that you have to think about most. And I think that's why Lugia did quite well over the weekend, was because this has one of the better times into the Comfey decks in general, just because of its high hit points. It has the V-Guard energies to help out as well, and it has 1-hit KO potential for the Giratina at the very least, and has enough one-prize Pokemon to be a headache for the Lost Zone decks, where they have high enough hit points to stay out of range of Cram and Sableye quite nicely. We have the new contender of Miraidon, seems to have done well, got into the mix, is a challenge for a number of archetypes, and now we have this interesting tug of war of the more aggressive Beach Court-based list that we've seen in both top 8 60s, and that path-based build that causes more of a headache for certainly Gardevoir, and other ability-based archetypes can give you some early pressure against Lugia as well. If you don't have knockout pressure, if you've gone first, for example, you can still have the sort of cheesy path combination that can help out here and there. Let's have a look then at the day 2 conversions, and as we can see, Lugia converted very well, and Lost Zone Box converted quite well, even with its popularity being so high. Giratina's having a tough time. I think it is kind of the public enemy number 1 right now. It seems to have the most even matchup spread, but even matchup spread means that everyone who's playing Giratina has a hard day ahead of them. Every single round is difficult for them because they're never really happy to see any matchup. They're just in the game every single time. So it is difficult to get those 6 and 7 wins accumulated with Giratina, certainly. Whereas playing some of these dodge and weave decks can have a better time. Miraidon did pretty okay for itself, to be honest. And Mew also had a very solid conversion rate. I do think Mew is also a good matchup into Lost Zone Giratina unless Tina's playing tech cards like Spiritomb. Yeah, this isn't too surprising for the day 2 usage. I think going into Barcelona, certainly. I think that Giratina may be less of a safe play because I think there will be some people looking to play Kyogre Lost Zone box, and I think there will be players encouraged by the Lugia. The one thing I will say is that Gardevoir seems pretty happy with the uptick in Miraidon if everyone's cutting the paths once again. That becomes a really nice matchup, and I think Gardevoir enjoys seeing Lugia as well. So I do think there's still a huge reason to see a good amount of Lost Zone to keep Gardevoir in check, if nothing else, but it doesn't seem too unhappy with the top 8 decks that we have just looked at, so something to bear in mind there, certainly. I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. That's it for the Pittsburgh Regional Championships. On to Barcelona SPE, as well as a regional over in Brazil in a couple of weeks' time. But that rounds out the Obsidian Flames format, and we're heading straight into 151. So keep an eye out for that on the channel, because it's coming very soon. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.